I know that this paragraph is a bit heavy, especially for a YouTube channel of this nature, but it is something that I am going to say anyway. The world, right now, is seemingly a much less happy place. It is a more depressed, more lonely, more cranky, more cynical, and more desperate. Where a lot of the most successful people seem to be those who are the worst people. From a YouTube perspective, it seems to be basically impossible to be really successful and really famous unless you're willing to remove any sort of basic humanity and ethics. You have to be the most abrasive, stupid, and ridiculous individual if you want to become someone that is known. You want all the views you want. You have to be an abject fraud that endangers yourself and unsuspecting bystanders. There is no current incentive to be a decent, caring, easygoing person. Instead, you must appeal to the lowest common denominator. Because, and this is the key point, that is what the audience wants. These are just characters. Most people are not abject flogs, but the current climate results in people being the worst versions of themselves. They need to create a fictional persona to result in the greatest possible reward. The way our world operates at the moment, if you are in my generation of Gen Z, and you want to be one of the most recognisable people in the internet space, you almost have to resort to whatever is the most insane, over-the-top, crazy behaviour you can cook up. You will trump anyone your age or thereabouts, even those who may be more talented or can do things that require literal perfection to achieve. It is not the best humanity can offer, not even remotely close, and yet it seems to be what is being rewarded in spades. The social media influencer is a job more and more people want to be when they grow up, which is basically having a name, letting only your elite friends the ability to use that name and be surrounded with your fellow beautiful creations, and tracking up all the views and likes you could ever dream of. How did the world steep to this dizzying low? A world where the worst are rewarded, as attention spans dwindle lower and lower for the vast majority of people who spend time on the internet, with no real sign that things are going to change or turn around in the near-ish future. Well, I am admittedly drawing a long bow here, but it all comes back to the T20 effect, a term I made up to describe the innovations that have occurred as an effort to draw people in, for the constant dopamine hits, for the product to just basically be one big highlight reel. And I have dubbed it this because of what has happened since the advent of T20 Cricket. When you ban tobacco advertising, you're not trying to actually harm people, and yet in a bizarre way, that is what happened. When a ban on tobacco advertising came into effect, this caused problems for England's cricket board, which resulted in the end of the Benson and Hedges Cup. In April 2002, Lord McLaurin made desperate phone calls in a car riding to the Lord's cricket ground in an attempt to persuade the counties that were on the fence regarding the creation of a T20 championship. The counties voted 11-7 in favour of T20 cricket. For something that was going to change the fabric of cricket, this one bizarrely was happening in England. In 1998, England was still playing one-day internationals with a red ball and white clothing, despite 2 World Cups being successfully staged with a white ball and clothing. In fact, every 50-over Benson and Hedges Cup match was played with the traditional ball and kit colour. What happened next blew everyone out of the water. The 2003 T20 Cup saw an average of around 30,000 people attending the games, with most of the crowd being families. This was not the type of crowd that was typical for a matchup between two county sides. The atmosphere was as deliberately laid back as possible. Nottinghamshire got their more toned players to post topless on posters. Worcestershire placed a jacuzzi on the boundary edge. Gloucestershire warned their committee that if any of them turned up wearing a tie, they would be kicked out. Yorkshire sold tickets at £2. Glamorgan asked fans to turn up in pyjamas. Surrey won the first T20 cricket tournament in 2003, but T20 was still not something that most people were really going to take seriously. Case in point, the first T20 International in 2005 at Eden Park between New Zealand and Australia. The teams played in retro 1980s kits, and it was such a loose affair. Some players wore fake moustaches. Australia won comfortably, with Glenn McGrath famously mocking an underarm delivery, a reference to the controversial underarm delivery in an Australia-New Zealand ODI at the MCG in 1981, which set the scene for umpire Billy Bowden to present him with a mock red card. McGrath bowled the match's last delivery legally, and New Zealand's last wicket fell. It was something no one took seriously at all. But the reason T20 grew, and the reason why it is now cricket's most popular format, to the point where people like me think the only way to increase the relevance of other formats is to cut down on the amount of international T20s that are played, is because unlike double wickets, super sixes, max cricket, or other short form cricket that had been tried before, T20s never felt like a gimmick. It did not feel like something that was trying too hard to be cool. It was basically just the same 50 over format cricket fans were very familiar with, but instead of 50 overs for each side, the matches were 20 overs a side. The popularity of T20 cricket was such that in 2007, the first World T20 is held, and it could not have got a better finish if it had tried. India-Pakistan, the sport's biggest rivalry, meeting in the final, with India coming up 4-run winners. And because of that young Indian team, as well as a notable test match loss, which India refused to admit it too gracefully, set the stage for the Indian Premier League. It made the BCCI the richest board and the most greedy board. But you really should watch my 2008 SCG test video for that story. But by 2009, T20 was not the same format that was laughed at, as was the case 4 years earlier, and even to a less extent 2 years before at the first ICC T20 event. David Warner was picked to play for Australia in a T20 International at the MCG in a match against South Africa, before he played a game at first-class level, the first to do so. He played well in that match, falling short of a ton on debut, and began a trend that took more than a decade to fully materialise, where players who were seen more as white ball players were picked to play in and succeed in the test arena. And of course, I don't need to tell any modern cricket fan about how England have made the typical T20 approach an almost cult-like identity of their test team. We must focus on the T20 effect though. Did you forget about that? Sorry, things for me often get out of hand. I first noticed the T20 effect as an Australian sports fan through the attempts of other sports to try and jump on the bandwagon off the back of the success of Australia's T20 franchise league, the Big Bash League. After the moderate success of BBL 1 and BBL 2, the league became a household name when the broadcast rights switched from pay TV Foxtel to free-to-air Channel 10, causing a popularity surge in T20 cricket here in Australia. The success of the BBL led to the creation of Fast 5 Netball, Fast 4 Tennis, and AFLX. Blah. These failed because those sports are not used to the shorter formats like cricket, and they forgot about the fact that the most important detail behind the success of T20 cricket was the fact that it was not a gimmick. But the only way to create anything that could be considered the T20 for most sports is to be a gimmick. But the T20 effect does not just mean the cricket boards are ignoring the history and prestige that is test match cricket. Because in the last few months, I have begun to notice that a lot of the development of social media platforms, which we know for a fact have caused serious problems for people's mental health, track well with the creation and expansion of T20 cricket. Now, if you look at enough random events, you're going to find some pretty strong correlations. To be fair, the world was largely tracking down this road. After all, the County T20 Championship would not have seen the light of day if there was no need to create a cricketing product that could be marketed as a format of the game that was shorter and could be seen as more family friendly and could entice younger people to come along to watch games of cricket. But we know that when something regarding cricket reaches popularity in India, it is hard to stop its momentum. I would argue when T20 cricket landed in England, then when India won the first World T20, then the IPL began off the back of seeking revenge against Cricket Australia and the ICC after the loss at the SCG in 2008, it was no wonder how T20 would dominate cricket. But for the rest of the world, it could be argued that without all that happening, would an app like TikTok be seen as workable in the first place? When a country of 1 billion people is getting behind something that is designed to be a highlights reel, why would you not give it a go? I have also noticed a lot of social media is just a copycat of what came before it. I would argue basically everything behind Snapchat has been done first or better by some other apps. The only things that is unique for it is Snaps, but even Instagram's stories are basically superior Snaps. The success of Facebook and Twitter saw the opening for copycats, with the whole goal of holding on to people's attention for as long as possible. And this is done by creating a product you can't look away from. And oh hey, isn't this familiar, cricket fans? The T20 format was designed to be as captivating as possible. And it's the short form video content more than most. What short form content is, it's just basically a shorter version of the traditional long form videos, in the same way T20 was just a shorter form of 50 over cricket. So it was not that gimmick that the hideous AFLX was. The shorter form content, upon reflection, was likely to dominate spaces like it has. What this resulted in, from a cricketing perspective, is the fact that T20 cricket, for that sport, is its only chance of gaining international success. The T20 World Cup expands to 20 teams for the 2024 edition, and honestly could go to as big as 32 teams. Not a chance for the one-day format. But our culture has got to such a low where everyone is just desperate for the attention, and what is the best way to get attention? To be fair, it is not always short. T20 is the most lazy of cricket's formats, and I'm not trying to be mean here, but T20 is a format where there is not none, but by comparison less tactics, given the fielding and bowling restrictions imposed and the incentive to swing for the fences, which can be entertaining, don't get me wrong, but it is nothing like the patience, concentration and hours of cricket that is needed in test matches. A lot of the internet's most popular content, whether it be a 20-second short or a 2-hour-long podcast or a 12-hour live stream, is all less effort. I'll almost definitely get more views on a short-form video than a long-form one, even though short films are just basically me blabbing into a camera, adding text and the smallest bits of editing, maybe throwing in an image here and there, and it's done. Whereas the long pseudo-documentaries require effort, patience, and a lot of ups and downs. And I'm not attempting to convert anyone here, enjoy the content you like, but I do put more effort into these long-form videos. And this is something that can be seen across a lot of channels because of the drop in attention spans thanks to the T20 effect. The point of the video is that when T20 cricket arrived, it changed the world. There was a demand for lower effort entertainment. When T20 arrived, it became clear it would be a hit, and it would be life-changing. I would argue the biggest reason for the state of some of the worst content on the internet is the desire for short-form, dopamine hit, highlight reel content, and T20 cricket was the first type of that content. No sport could replicate it, and these flogs will continue to get the attention they crave. They need to keep the persona of happiness, and at the end of the day, everyone loses. This content is lazy. The worst people put stuff together with very little thought into it, but they get rewarded with all of the dopamine they could want and make it seem practically to a lot of lonely, insecure people that this is the life that they should have had, but can only dream of. And for young kids growing up, more and more want to be these types of people. It is a long bow, and maybe the most accurate way of putting it is the arrival of T20 cricket spawned our modern era. This was the first of the many examples of the T20 effect, the creation of shorter and smaller versions of pre-existing content with the hope it will be more popular than said content. T20 was the launching point, and whether subconsciously or not, and it is absolutely subconsciously, a lot of the world's richest people owe it to a few arguments made in a car and a ban on tobacco advertising. And the people made famous only by being a nutball on TikTok or YouTube or Twitch, they would not have a career, plain and simple, without investment in dopamine hitting content, which they only started trying when they saw potential it had to get views. Potential it only had when it was given a chance by social media platforms. A chance it was only given by the social media platforms because they thought it could work. And it could only work if someone took a chance on it, working before anyone else had. That anyone else was the English and Indian Cricket Board. And from a die-hard Australian cricket fan, I would just like to say, thanks a lot, guys.